Welcome to Key Talk. Let's begin the show. Unlock your potential. Let your true self flow. With every episode, we're setting you free. It takes one key to open many doors, and you are the master key. So let's get started.
It's a question. Great. Hey, you guys, it is Key Talk with yours truly, Coach AmberJ. And if you guys did not hear the song in the background, the song has actually released. Key Talk is available on all streaming platforms. So please make sure, if you want to know how to support me, just go stream it, download it, play it, tag me in it. It's a powerful song. Shout out to Jay Natural, who was the visionary behind this project, who brought this to life for Key Talks specifically. But I listen to it every morning because it has me hyped. It is speaking life to me. And so if you need a song that is going to pour into your spirit, hype you up, and confidently have you go chase your dreams and become the greatest version of you, go download the song, okay? It's called Key Talk by J Natural featuring Coach AmberJ. So make sure you guys go download it. But today is the day we are here on Key Talk. And as you know, every week we are talking about powerful conversations, sitting at the round table, having conversations about past pain and trauma, how to release and how to heal. And so we are going to have an amazing conversation as we dive deep into this month, which I'm dedicating completely to domestic violence. And I also want to give a special shout out today because it is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, but today is a day of awareness. So I wanted to support breast cancer. So anyone that has struggled with breast cancer, lost someone, I am honoring you today. But I want to do a quick recap of last week's show. It was honoring joy and discussing domestic violence. And so thank you guys for continuing to join, share, and invite people. Last week, we talked about joys lost at domestic violence. And some of the things that the key points that we covered was understanding domestic violence, creating safe spaces for people, resources for help. So I wanted to give the National Domestic Violence Hotline's phone number. If you guys are listening, write it down. 800-799-SAFE. That is the National Domestic Violence Awareness phone number or hotline. So make sure if you know someone or if you're going through it, there is resources. Number 4 was empowering choices. Sometimes we have to allow people to make their own decisions, but we can empower them on making those choices for them. And so let's honor joy by raising awareness and being vigilant allies those that have been affected by domestic violence. And if you found that episode meaningful, please make sure that you continue to share. But I would like to introduce, because today I have an amazing guest and I'm really excited to have him. And I asked him like short last minute in a sense, but he said yes. And so I'm so grateful. So today we have an amazing guest today, Jon Stevenson. He is a native of Las Vegas, a Western high school graduate, grew up in Bonanza Village, spent 27 years with Las Vegas Fire and Rescue, going from firefighter to medic, captain to chief. Oversaw emergency operations and programs with LVFR, partnering with the community in homelessness and psychiatric emergencies. Taught classes with LVFR, CLV on leadership, diversity, teamwork, and HR courses. And he is now working for UNLV on the Tourism Business Igniter program at Nevada Partners, where we are today. So welcome, Jon.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it is a pleasure. I'm so excited to have you here and have a real conversation. Shout out to all your amazing work and dedication and accolades.
Thank you.
You're like the most humble man I've met. So.
I've been lucky. I'm blessed. I'm just full of gratitude. I have been lucky and fortunate that stuff just keeps falling my way.
Wow. And that's because you just aligned yourself with it, right? When you do the work, you get blessed with that tenfold.
You just keep plugging away, and next thing you know, a bunch of accomplishments behind you, and you keep just kind of plugging away.
Wow. Y'all see how humble he is? Like, thank you. I really appreciate that. So we're gonna just get into this conversation.
Okay.
One of the things that really interests me the most about you is when you said that you were a chief, a fire chief, and I wanted to have the conversation on your perspective and some of the challenges and things that you've seen. So we can start there if you like.
Well, the first thing so going into it, I remember going to my very, very, very first domestic violence call. And it was one where we showed up and this, lady was there, and she described, being pushed, by her partner. And she said, I was just in the backyard mowing my lawn, minding my own business, mowing the lawn. They live together. And, and so we see in the backyard, there's a lawnmower on the side, and we see that she's upset and all that stuff. And so we're hearing her story. And then the guy that, he comes home, so I had already made up my mind that he was the most evil thing on the planet, no two ways about it. And then when he got home, I remember when he's describing what happened with Metro, and she's there, and all of a sudden the story got way, way, way complicated. There was way more to the story. And the reason why that stuck out to me is that I came away with this sense that domestic violence cases are not ones where you just walk in and you just know what's black and what's white straight away.
Right.
They are spectacularly gray, and they're dangerous. They're super, super dangerous. So it's in that gray area where all that danger lurks, and it's the takeaway is that you really should not judge anyone who's either been necessarily the victim or the perpetrator, because you just don't know the circumstances that led up to it, all the escalations that got there, or maybe it was just one escalation. You just don't know.
Absolutely. I want to highlight that because me being in the abuser or the perpetrator in my own story, I know that I was one that escalated, right? And so when a lot of times the way that we judge people, like we go in and you hear a woman's story, and sometimes that overrides a man's story when it didn't happen that way, right? And so I like that you highlighted that. And the one thing that we really need to do when we are dealing with domestic violence is take those judgmental lenses off, because you just don't know. You don't know. And so, man, that is really interesting. So what happened?
So if I remember correctly, this is back in like 95. It's like my very, very first call like that. I can't remember if he was arrested. I don't think they had the mandatory arrest as of yet. I think the mandatory arrests came like 3-4 years later.
Okay.
And so she wasn't, injured in a way that needed to go to the hospital.
Okay.
But it was definitely one where, if it happened today, then he would definitely probably have gone.
Okay.
To jail for the 12 hours and the like. But it was with subsequent, examples of domestic violence, where I learned that it happens to the, to the unemployed up to the professional class, rich to poor, black and white, male and female. You cannot assign victimhood or perpetrator based on gender. You just can't, because both sides take a turn with it. I've had, LGBTQ, domestic violence cases. I had one where it was we'll call it differently able, hard of hearing, two lesbians who had the sign language to each other. They got into a domestic, violent thing. And then you learn that keep from
of mine. I worked in property management, and I had a deaf family, and I remember there was a domestic violence case that took place, and she was the offender, the deaf woman was, and but it doesn't discriminate on those emotions, and then like whether they're disabled or they're able bodies, it doesn't matter. So what is, I'm going to go through some of these questions.
Okay.
As a chief and as a retired fire chief, how has understanding of domestic evolved throughout your career and into retirement?
Well, the main thing was watching just how unbelievably complicated, these cases are, especially knowing that there's this complex mix of there's two kinds of psychological health categories.
That's
One of them
good.
is mental health, to
Okay.
whereas if you are prone to like schizophrenia, bipolar, you're depressive or you're manic, those are mental health disorders. But then there's behavioral health.
Yeah.
Behavioral health is if I learned that every time somebody pushes me on the shoulder, I'm supposed to punch them in the face. If that's my culture, if that's what my family does, every time you get in my face, I get in your face and we start fighting. That's behavioral health.
Yeah.
So when you get a mix, of mental health plus behavioral health circumstances, now you got a problem.
Yeah.
I didn't know that,
Yeah.
going into it. And I didn't know how complicated that interplay between mental health and the stuff we learn from our own families and our own
Yeah.
friends, the behavioral health element. I just, all those things kind of come together and it's just to make it much, much, much more complicated. And they're so spectacularly dangerous. I think about the calls that we went to. So with first responders, no one goes in until Metro is able to clear the call and make sure that it's safe.
Okay.
Nobody's going in. And we will stage like a block or two away from the fire side or the ambulance side, at least a block or two away, because you just don't know which one's going to spin out of control.
Right.
I don't know if you remember the death of Sergeant Henry Prentice here in the early 2000s, I believe. It was a sergeant. It was over in the Southwest. He responds to a domestic violence call. And as soon as he goes up to the call, whatever, the guy who had been beating on his girlfriend met him at the door with an AK and just was gunning him. And so the other Metro officers had come out. And so Sergeant Prentice made his way out the house to get away from him. And the other Metro officers showed up right when they saw the guy execute, the sergeant in the driveway.
Oh my God.
And then they just unloaded. So now it's on. So that is, so that's the one piece that I learned, about, just how dangerous those are. So
yeah.
Metro's always putting themselves, the most dangerous calls they go on are domestic violence
yeah.
because the tensions are so high,
yeah.
the stresses are so high, it's just out of control.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I learned, this is less in the way of the fire chief side, but I also learned the way society, can be kind of coarse about that. So I'm in the barbershop about 2 weeks after the shooting.
Oh, wow.
And I'm listening to guys talk about it. And I'd never been so mad before in my life, except listening to guys at the barbershop saying that the sergeant had it coming to him. And they said, I heard he was pimping that girl anyway. Just the most insanely, and I'm boiling. Because I knew the backstory of this guy because I went to high school with guys who went to school with him. He was a football coach to kids. He mentored kids, family man, church man, all that stuff. And, in the barbershop, they're rationalizing it like he had it coming. He had this
like he deserved it or something.
Exactly.
Wow.
And so it just, the coarseness of the way, the conversation can spin out.
But in it, I think it even ties into the behavioral health part that you mentioned, because these are behaviors where we justify things that we just don't know. So if we don't have an understanding of it, we justify it, not recognizing this is a behavioral health issue or this is a mental health issue that escalated.
Exactly.
Especially in our community. I want to kind of go back and touch on that because like I said, I shared that I grew up with 4 brothers, the only girl. So my behavior was, if I didn't get my way, I threw a fit, I hit you. I thought this was okay behavior, right? And so when I went through
how you survived for the most part.
For the most part, right. So when I went into a relationship and I was the abuser, the perpetrator, I realized that I learned this behavior and it wasn't a mental health issue or it wasn't a character issue. It was just a behavior issue.
Health,
And so I had to unlearn like this behavior is like, no, you don't put your hands on people, but a lot of things are just not taught to us and we lack a lot of knowledge. And I think we justify the unknown because we just don't have the understanding. So it's really, and I think this is why I like having these conversations and having experts come, because the more that we know, the more aware we can be and knowledgeable we can actually be a help and not a hindrance.
Now I will say this, I don't want to make it sound like, because it is so complicated, that it's never, ever, ever black and white. Sometimes it is black and white.
Correct.
And the ones that come to my mind as being, that appear to be, I don't want to overspeak, that appear to be more black and white, sex trafficking victims.
Okay.
Those are the ones that tended to look really, really, really black and white. So some kid ages out of the foster care system, they're out on the street, and and a pimp gets hold of them, and the like. Those domestic violence cases, because a lot of times those come across as domestics, then you get,
You get there
the
and you
full
get
gist of like, oh, okay, I see.
wow.
So there's those, and then there's and there's other cases, whereas in the same vein, not
Okay.
necessarily on the trafficking side, but one of the phenomena that is emerging, with teenagers, and more depressingly in the Black community, is this concept of the Romeo pimp. And so the Romeo pimp is the boyfriend that gets
Wow.
the girlfriend to get out there and make that money for us, girl. Make that money
Oh,
for us.
wow.
14, 15, 16 years old.
Wow.
And if she don't make that money for him, there's going to be a problem. And it comes in
the consequences of abuse.
Exactly. And in a way, it is fundamentally a domestic violence kind of thing, but it's got an additional,
added piece of that sex trafficking part.
Exactly. So
Wow.
I don't want to say it's so complicated where there's no bad guys or there's no there's no victim, no perpetrator. There are cases where that is. I only bring that up to say that I learned to reserve judgment until I really, really knew more of what was going on.
And you highlighted a big part of it too, because I think sometimes we think domestic violence only is with a couple or they are in agreement to this relationship.
Exactly.
And it's not that. And I think we need to be very careful when dealing with or even comedy. Like I have not shared a lot of my story because it's very complicated. And also trigger warning, right? Like it's an area where we can be triggered. Last night I went to a show and a comedian mentioned something about domestic violence. And I heard someone in the crowd say, "Oh, my husband's abusive." And so we talk about things so casually, but not recognizing what people are really dealing with, And so I unfortunately didn't get to have a conversation with the young lady who said it, because I seen her and heard her, but it was said so casually. And this is why these conversations are important, especially like with our young teenagers, because some of this is behavior that needs to be identified as like, this is inappropriate behavior.
Agreed. And there has to be that educational component and the nurturing component, because one of the fundamental questions that come up all the time is, if you were abused, why'd you go back?
Yeah.
Why'd you go back? Because it's complicated.
Let's talk about that. Like, especially from being, I'm sure you've heard stories on why they stayed, or have you seen a repeating story that you had to go show up at?
I've seen some. I know more of them than have seen some, because we always we kind of live vicariously through other people's experiences and things like that. And so, but again, I learned to reserve judgment, because sometimes the financial situation is such to where she feels like, maybe I'll take a chance. Or maybe that person who was the abuser really did come off as contrite and say, like, I don't like me when I get that way. And maybe they're legitimate and honest that I don't like when I rage out like that. I am sorry. I will work hard to not do that again. And they slip. Sometimes behavioral health, is or at least the capacity for keeping yourself constrained. Maybe that's not a muscle that they strengthen. Exactly.
Okay.
And so I don't want to put it at the level of like of an addiction, but it can be a habit. From the behavioral health piece, where they have to unlearn a behavior. And maybe that person expresses they really want to learn how to do different, but
there's no knowledge of what to do different,
or they're on that path of becoming different, but they slip, or they get out of hand. And again, one of the things that I worry about, and I'll say this more specifically, in the Black community, because that's obviously what I know, is I worry about how we underestimate the power of escalation. And so all violence has a justification to the person who's doing the violence.
Right.
Every perpetrator of violence always justifies it.
That is true.
Whether the and it's not to say that it's a legitimate justification, but I think about songs like Blue Cantrell's, Hey Ladies. And so she's upset because her man's cheating, and so she decides she's gonna run up the credit cards, burn up his clothes, she's gonna ruin him. It's kind of an escalation. When so he comes home, realizes all his clothes are cut up, this, that, the other. She ran up the credit cards. He may rationalize his own escalation. And so one of the behavioral health components I'd like to see happen within our community is to say, if you do get your heart broken and you've been disrespected or maligned or misused, you have to walk away. just walk
Yes.
away. Don't. My recommendation: don't run up the credit cards. Don't burn the clothes. Don't key the.
Yes.
Don't key the car. Don't burn his house. Just say, you know what? I expected better. I deserve better. Best of luck to you. I'm gonna walk away.
And I want to share on my behalf, because that was my situation. Is I didn't have the tools to de-escalate. I didn't have the knowledge on how to control my own emotions and my behavior until I went to 26 weeks of anger management.
Right.
Until I went to therapy to gain these tools, because I didn't have them. And I think that's a lot of the issue again, is we just don't know what to do. How do I, especially growing up and saying, like, if my belief or how I grew up was to, you do me wrong, I'm going to make you pay for it physically.
Exactly.
I
Or
don't
some
have,
kind of way.
or some kind of way.
Right.
I don't have the tools to say, well, what other behavior do I put in place of that?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where it's really important. But I think that, and this is just my own recommendation, this is why it's so important that we do the work, because a lot of these triggering traumas that lead into relational escalations or domestic violence stem from childhood trauma that was never healed or dealt with or identified. And so this is why the work has to be done. Because for me, when you get into a relationship with someone, all your heart is out there. So it's like you're the most vulnerable, you're the most you share parts of you that you wouldn't share with anyone else. So now I'm handing myself over to you and trusting that you're going to handle me with care. And sometimes they don't know how to do that.
Right. They're either unwilling or unable.
That's good.
Yeah.
Unwilling or unable.
Yeah.
So what would you say, or how would you suggest someone that is on a path of trying to become better on this journey? What tools would you share with them?
So I would start a little further back.
Okay.
So as a chief and have been in the fire department, we get the benefit of getting a lot of the young firefighters that come through and their lives are starting out. And so invariably what we would see a lot in the fire service, and I believe to probably a similar maybe extent with new police officers, is they get this new sexy job that pays pretty well. Then they go to a party and they're like,
I'm the man now.
I'm the man, exactly.
Or I'm the woman now.
Or they go to a club, of different kinds.
Okay.
So they go to this club, and one is a club that's got music, the other one's got glitter, if you know what I mean. And so they tell their story, and it's a sexy job, and then good shape, and they make pretty good money.
And growing up in the way I grew up, when you see a firefighter, you like, that's husband material.
Right.
So I get what you're saying.
And so I would counsel firefighters all the time, say, don't grab that first, stacked, young, hot thing, whatever. Take your time, get to know that. Now I would say it more pejoratively, like, hey, leave that stripper alone, go get that kindergarten teacher.
Right.
Okay. And that would be that'd be my lead-in talk, to kind of expound upon them and say, look, you're young, you've got a lot, you got a sexy job, you've got choices. Take your time. Don't let the first one that's hot in the bed, be the one that you stick with, or that's going to be your future wife, because that might be the future plaintiff, going for child support, and she's going to change her name to the plaintiff in a couple of years. So you might as well.
Y'all better catch that key right there.
Take your time,
And
so just as a shorthand, I'd say, you know what, you better go grab that kindergarten teacher, leave that, not to denigrate, exotic dancers, but it was a shorthand for that.
Right.
But the point of it being is that you have to, there's a saying that goes, measure twice before you cut once.
Measure twice before cutting once.
Because you don't want to make a mistake of where you cut.
Right.
And so you measure twice so you can cut once. And so I would say the same thing in relationships. Take your time, measure carefully. Before you propose, and so, or before you get serious with this person. And I would also tell them, you don't know a person until you know what they're like under stress. So there's a Hindu saying that goes, people's personalities are like liquid inside a sponge. You don't know what's in it until you squeeze it and see what comes out. Or a different version of that is people's personality is like a liquid in a cup. You don't know what's inside until it's been bumped and you see what spills out. So you don't know a person until you see what they react like under stress, when they're angry or whatever. Do they keep their composure? Are they still civil? Do they manipulate and violate rules? And or
to benefit them or to get over.
exactly.
Yeah.
You need to wait that time and see how they react. Then you know, because if you make your decision, if you make your decision about that person before you've had a chance to see what they're like under stress, that's too late.
Yeah.
You've
Because
got
now you're already wrapped in it and you're tied into
exactly.
it. And that's like really great advice that I wish I had at 19 or 18.
Same thing.
Right?
Same
Because
thing.
those are the things like you don't know. And I don't think we even are knowledgeable on how to date, right?
Right.
How do we actually take our time? Because especially right now where we're overstimulated and we're exposed to all the things. And like you said, having a sexy job now gives you access to a whole nother level that you've never been exposed to.
Right. And most of these dudes have no game. Zero
so
game.
Their money is their game.
So the money and the career
job.
is the game, and they run up against the women that no game. They know game. Capital KNOW. They know game. And so you show up, you're deep in the pool and you don't swim like that. You don't swim like the way they know how to swim.
Yeah.
And so they get caught out there.
Wow. That is really good information. I hope that you guys are catching those keys, especially to you young, I'm going to say young adults, men or women, that listen, take your time and get to know someone. And it's true. You don't know someone until pressure bust pipes or it what is that?
Or they're like liquid in a sponge.
You just don't know until
they're squeezed.
Yeah.
Then you see what comes out of them.
Yeah.
Then you see what comes out, because everyone's on their best behavior.
But also for yourself too. This is why I'm so big on inner self, right? And knowing yourself. How are you under pressure, right? How do you, are you able to de-escalate a situation if your partner doesn't have that capacity, right? Like, it's also about knowing yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, what triggers you, right? And then, do I know how to communicate properly? Because it's not just one-sided, right?
Right.
So.
And in that communication piece, that's another thing I harp on about is, do you know how to have hard conversations? Do you know how to have conversations where either one of you is disappointed, and know how to do it in a way that's relationship preserving and not destroying? Because otherwise,
say that part one more time. Yeah. That was good for my soul.
Do you know how to have hard conversations that are relationship preserving and not relationship toxic? Because if you don't, you will avoid those tough conversations.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing you can always, if you went down to the family court right now and you asked them, is there a conversation that could have kept you guys from being in divorce courts right now? Can you think of one? And they'll say, yes. I can think of a time that if I knew how to talk about this issue or this disappointment or this area where I was let down or I was nervous or scared, then we might not be here today.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that it's a skill that has to be learned and is not taught.
Yes.
And there needs to be more in the way of education of how to hold difficult conversations.
Yes. That is, I would say, even for me now, I'm in a stage of dating after divorce, and I've realized like I have to be vulnerable enough to have real hard conversations and address. And one of the things recently that happened to me was being able to express my vulnerable self and communicating that. And again, being raised by boys, I still have that like shut down, like silence your feelings, no feelings, stop crying type of emotions. So me as a woman, an adult woman now trying to date, I have to be able to like have those hard conversations and be vulnerable. And it was hard. So I'm glad that the person that I was communicating with was able to allow me the space to communicate, but in a way that allowed me to open up and not feel so bad. But if that conversation if that didn't happen, I would have cut the person off and went on about my way, because that's just what I know. And I wouldn't have preserved the relationship.
Exactly.
So.
The mantra is, you can't fix what you can't talk about.
Ooh, that's good.
And if you don't,
write that down. I hope y'all listen. Put that in the chat. Say it again.
If you can't, you can't fix what you can't talk about.
You can't fix what you can't talk about.
Yeah. And then the next part is, if you don't fix it, you're going to fight about it.
If you don't fix it, you're going to fight about it. So listen, get those keys. If you can't talk about it.
You can't fix what you can't talk about.
You can't fix what you can't talk about. Then you're going to fight about it.
Right.
And then you're going to project it onto something that has nothing to do with that.
Who knows?
Right.
Once you open the floodgates of that, who knows? So there's a guy named C.S. Lewis. He's this writer. He's a writer / philosopher. And he had this line, which always stuck with me. He goes, there's only one way a line can be perfectly straight. But there's an infinite number of ways a line can be crooked.
Infinite. Okay.
So what you have to do is, what is the straight line for your relationship, and how do we take what's otherwise a crooked relationship and try to straighten try to straighten it, you know. And so I bring that up to say that you do need to talk about those things. There does need to be agreement on, do we want as close to a straight line for a relationship, or are we just going to take, you know, the crooked that comes with it? Because if you're going to take the crooked, then everything is fair game. There's an infinite number of ways to make a mess of your relationship. There's precious few ways to do it right.
And it's interesting too, because you have two people coming from different backgrounds, belief systems, baggage, trauma, all of these things, and you're now mixing it and putting it together, and it's like an explosion waiting to happen, right? So you really have to be willing to have those hard conversations. But I go back to, these are conversations that we need to start with ourselves, and this is why therapy, coaching, all going to educational pieces like this, or YouTube's, all of this are so important, so that you can develop that personal development to grow, because I think that's a huge part that lacks within a lot of us, is that personal development. Yeah, so this is so good. How important is it for the first responders, like firefighters and paramedics, to receive training on recognizing and responding to domestic violence situations?
So the first thing, so growing up with it, what we've learned is the first thing is that it was safety, is knowing that these situations are so tense, so volatile, that safety is the first, scene safety is the most important element to it. And you just, even when you're there and it seems like it's kind of, you know, settling down, something like that, there is no proof that it's going to not take back off, because when he tells his side of the story and then she tells her side of the story, it don't matter that you're there or not. It just ramped up all over again. So the safety of it. So we really don't want any of our firefighters or ambulance personnel on a domestic violence scene that doesn't have law enforcement there. But that was how we did it in the past. Now, one of the things I created, you know, when I was as a chief of the fire department, was a thing called the crisis response team. And what I did was I put a licensed clinical social worker. So basically a social worker that's just short of like a PA, almost like that, you know. And so they can diagnose, they can do legal holds. They're like the top level of mental health healthcare professionals, just short of psychologists, psychiatrists. Right. You know, and so I put one of those on an ambulance to respond to 911 psychiatric emergencies, which they oftentimes got brought into domestic violence cases. So and the reason for them was, before, scene safety with law enforcement was, you know, what was our main go-to for making sure that, you know, the scene was safe and like that. But then we started evolving and said, look, if we have the LCSW there, they can help de-escalate the situation. Or if they're not there, I had the social worker from that unit teaching cops and firefighters how to de-escalate, you know, how to not participate in it and go back and forth with the person, start de-escalate. So we started teaching de-escalation techniques to kind of bring the temperature down, you know, of these kind of calls, not just psychiatric, but just all kinds of calls like that. And then so from there, we teaching that the safety part of it, and then the de-escalation piece, and then we, you know, and part of that de-escalation was to learn how to be very, very, very patient with your patient care. You know, because they're still keyed up, you know, so you really just can't get to, you know, tell me about how your elbow hurts. And talk about that. You know,
because their adrenaline and everything is also.
And try to keep, come back to me, you know, let's talk about your elbow. I don't want to talk about my elbow.
My elbow, I can't even feel it right now. I'm talking about this.
So we had to teach them how to be patient in their patient care. And so
it's
evolved, you know, and we've gotten better at it, you know. And now, would I argue that it's a perfect situation for it? No, I would not. Because
and I think there's no ideal perfect situation for that. But what I want to highlight is that these education courses need to be implemented in all career fields. Because even for me in property management, especially during COVID, it was like the height of domestic violence. And for my team, I would tell like my staff, my maintenance men, like, listen, don't go into that situation. Like, don't get involved. Just call 911. Like, unfortunately, we cannot go in because you don't know if it's safe, if it's clear. You're going to hear one part. You're going to go in with with a judgmental view of things. So don't even get involved. If someone called saying they heard domestic violence, we were trained to call 911 and not get involved, you know, because you don't know what.
You don't know. And one of the things that we learned going along with that patient care thing is the social worker taught us to figure out a way to recruit the victim into being their own advocate for healthcare. We say, what do you need, to help
That's
you
a
feel
great
better,
question.
And so by figuring out a way to get them participating in their own care, then you make an advocate out of them, you make a partner out of them, and that's a de-escalation technique too.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that definitely, because now it seems like you care enough about what's happening to me, and you're not focused on the situation.
Right.
That's a really great tactic.
And so getting them to participate in their own care goes a long way towards getting, to, at least the temporary resolution that might be needed, for that situation. Exactly.
Yeah. So I want to take a second, if we have some audience, if they have any questions, or if there is any questions being brought up on social media. Okay. No. Anyone have a question?
Okay.
No. All right. Well, we're going to keep this conversation going. I hope that you guys are enjoying this. Make sure that you guys are dropping some keys in there. Drop me some keys. Let me know that you're listening. But I want to go into, we talked about some of the incidents you've seen. Oh, you have a question? Okay. Does he need a mic? No, it's okay.
So
can you come up though?
Oh, yes. So my question is, how would you know if you and a potential partner is compatible or not?
Oh, I'm gonna let John answer that one.
All right. So fire chiefs are not necessarily experts in relationships. I just want to get it as a qualifier, but we see enough of them because I see hundreds of firefighters, thousands of firefighters over the course of my career. Both the older cats, when I was the new guy, and then the ones that are my contemporaries, and then the new ones that come up behind me. So you get to see the same themes over and over and over. So the way again, going back to what I said earlier is, first off, you have to know were you here when I said about the piece where you don't know a person's personality until they're stressed out.
Yeah.
So you need to see that. Number two, the way all relationships break down is sooner or later somebody's being selfish. So you kind of wait around to see who's going to be the selfish one, and is that going to be a consistent and chronic, element to your relationship? Yeah. If the selfishness shows up early, you got your sign. You got your sign. But if it never shows up, if it keeps being reciprocal, towards I'm looking out for you, you're looking out for me, and then next day I'm looking out for you, you're looking out for me. One day I'm not feeling it, you carry me. One day you're not feeling it, I carry you. If you don't see that selfishness in the relationship start to emerge, you might be onto something, in that relationship.
Yeah.
And then the next thing, would be the third component is, can you have difficult conversations in a way that is relationship strengthening as opposed to relationship weakening? And what you find out there is, because that's where you're going to find out if there's selfishness or not, is if in the course of that conversation, they cut you off, or they don't want to hear your point of view, or they're dismissive of it. Now you're getting your selfishness clues that let you know that this might not be, where it is for me. But if they're genuinely interested in hearing what you're, what you're concerned about, and they also want to help kind of solve that problem, right along with you. Now you're getting more clues to the contrary that, this might work after all. So that's it always takes time. What I would say is you will never, ever, 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 ever know that you got your perfect partner because of sexual compatibility. And that is one of the key mistakes young cats make. Young cats think, that because the sex is off the charts, well, this has got to be my soulmate. Yes. And it does not work that way.
At all. I think sex actually complicates and confuses
because you gloss over.
Yeah,
you gloss over the cracks.
You're like, oh, that's not a red flag. No foul plays on the, what is it? No calls on the play.
Exactly. Now, I don't know why she has all these, these animal heads, all turned upside down in her bedroom. But boy, I tell you what.
Yes, yes. And I want to say something, compatibility looks different too. I think that sometimes we think being compatible with someone means that you match them exactly. Sometimes it's the opposite. Like you, again, knowing your own strengths and weaknesses, having someone that is the opposite of you, and how can you guys mesh that together? opposed to like you both being a match. Like, oh, we both like this and we both have these interests. This means we're compatible. That doesn't necessarily mean that, because where I'm strong at and you're strong at may mean we might clash.
Exactly.
So I think that also helps for me, like determining your compatibility.
And go ahead.
Intro a little bit into as far as like finding out when you're compatible. What I sort of learned is that when you're in a relationship, of course, when you first in love,
the honeymoon stage,
right,
the honeymoon stage,
right.
Everything they could do wrong could be right.
Right.
So I mean, what you got to ask yourself is that, okay, with the other person, let's say there's something that does upset you or get you very upset. You have to ask yourself, okay, can I live with this for the rest of my life?
Oh, that's a good question.
Without it interrupting my relationship. If I could take it, I'm going to take it and never bring it up again as a problem. But if it's something later on that's going to continue bothering me or I cannot live with, then later on in that relationship, it's obviously going to turn into a problem.
Yeah.
So I would say in that kind of course, you got to ask yourself those kind of questions. That, okay, if you're going to live with it, never bring it up again and move on and accept that's what it is. But if it's something that's a little bit too much and you're going to, eventually get tired of that or it's going to get to you every time, then that's already a clue that,
you're not compatible.
There's something, it's not compatible and you're going to be bumping into some.
Well, I see your point, but I have a slight take on it, a slightly different take, in that you can see things that might bother you, and the like, but the question then is, can you talk about it? So let's say, for example, you can't stand shows like The Bachelorette and like that. Your girl loves them. Your girl loves The Bachelorette and Love Island. You think they're the stupidest, most mind-numbing things you've ever seen in your life. And it drives you crazy. That's something you can talk about with us. Like that. We're not compatible there. The kind of shows that you like to watch, I don't like. I don't want to hear the updates or nothing like that. But if you can't talk about that with them, and then also say, that's my hang up. You watch what you want to watch. I'm just letting you know that.
Don't involve me in that.
Or I'll be over here, grinding my teeth, down to, something nice and flat and smooth, whatever. But it's knowing that I have something that may bug me. I'm comfortable enough to let you know that it bugs me, but I'm also honest enough to know that that's my problem.
Yeah.
I don't need to make you conform to my TV watching habits, because that would make me the selfish one in that case. Good. And so that's one of those kind of cases where you can find out who's the selfish one in this one. You making her, not watch Love Island and The Bachelorette because it bothers you, but again, the conversation, learning how to have that conversation is practice for the later conversation.
Yeah.
When you do want to talk about something of more
finances or more.
Exactly. Yeah. Being in the habit of being able to talk about what's ever on my mind, and not just saying I'll just live with it, I'll just suck it up like that. Because we only suck up so much before it comes out.
Yeah.
And so those are, to me, great opportunities to practice having those honest, forthright conversations, and then being honest with yourself, like, that's my problem. You ain't got to change for me, just because. And she might say, I hate, watching football all day long, or soccer or basketball. I don't want to hear about it, whatever. But I'm good with you watching it or like that, and I support you. But now you know where I stand, and then she has to make a decision. Well, I don't want to, mess with his thing either. So you learn how to be honest about what bugs you, but by the same token, say, I am not going to let what bugs me, be your problem.
Be projected on you. That's good.
One other question. You mentioned, you guys were talking about it earlier, about them continuing to go back to the relationship regardless. I've had my sister being in one of those relationships, and of course I wanted to kick the crap out of that, the boyfriend or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
My father said to me back and go, what's the point? You're gonna do that, you're gonna get arrested, you're gonna get into all these problems, she's gonna run back to him, but it's until she's ready to finally leave him is when we step in.
Right.
Other than that, it's them. But again, why is it that they keep running back to that?
Presumably there's a need they think is being fulfilled in there,
sure.
and so there's a need they think is been filled there, and then there's a breakover point with hope and optimism, to where you think, okay, I legitimately believe this person is sorry and contrite for what they did, and they really do want to work at being different. And and that might be true.
Yeah.
It just might be true. Because there's a lot of failings that we have as human beings
Absolutely.
that we wish we didn't have, that we so wish we didn't have.
And then your partner knows that part of you
Exactly.
that other people don't know. So it's like, I know this is his shortcomings, and I know that he's working diligently to overcome this, but it's a hiccup. And I think this is also where that grace and the non-judgment comes into it. To what degree, though, right? So I think last week I talked about, until it's to your safety, right? When you're throwing hands on one another, hurting them, then there's a time where you guys need to break that off. But I think a lot of times why you go back is because of that. The other thing, a huge component that I want to talk about, is codependency. A lot of us, 90% of adults, are codependent. And codependent is a disease of extremes, where we don't see ourselves in the right perspective, or we weren't parented properly. And so a lot of times you're in relationships and you're codependent on the other person, whether you're the dependent one or they are. You become codependent to that situation, and it's hard to leave. It's now my addiction and my drug, and this is normal. And, I'm a people pleaser, and, all of these things go into it.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes we make idols out of relationships.
That is so true.
And so sometimes we decide a relationship is the only thing that can give me purpose and meaning and identity, and I'll take a beating, to keep that identity.
And keep that. Even too, for me, when I decided to get married, like, that was a part of it. Like, I didn't want to be a statistic, so I knew me and this person wasn't compatible, but we had a child now, and so I'm like, I need to be married, and I need my family to accept me, and all of these ideologies and belief systems that I created in my own head, I was willing to sacrifice and settle for certain things that were not okay, for the illusion of I have a healthy relationship and I'm married and I could say I'm a wife, right? So it's also having that honest conversation with yourself too, is why are you there, and again, I'm never going to not beat this into your head. Self-love, self-care, inner healing, like, that is the key component, because until you're honest with you, you can't be honest with anybody.
Right.
So
agreed.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up. I want to leave with one last question. And what message would you like to share with listeners about the importance of honoring and addressing domestic violence in our society?
So what I would say is reserve judgment, as often as you can, and as long as you can, until you really, really know. Number two, I think as a society, we need to talk more about we do too much of trying to make it black and white. We do too much of trying to say, okay, there's a victim, there's a perpetrator, when in reality it's layered, And so what I would like to see us do as a society is do better about teaching about, behavioral health in addition to the mental health component. I do wish there were more intermediate steps before it goes, criminal the way it does.
Yeah, for
because
sure.
Some of the domestic violence charges and the consequences that come with it.
Yeah.
They're
insane.
and
Yeah.
a lifelong.
Yeah.
And I'd rather see a more positive discipline.
Absolutely.
Towards a step, and then an escalated step, and then an escalated step.
Yeah.
Because there's so much to be taught and learned about how to manage complicated relationships. And again, those anger management courses and the domestic violence courses, I'd rather people go through those a few rounds of that, and then we start talking about, okay, you took it too far this time, or whatever. I get the fact that we want to prevent the worst case scenarios, and I get that, and it makes all the sense in the world. But sometimes you can exacerbate that, because when you've created a lifelong DV, not felon, but like registered, now they can't find work because of the DV.
Yeah.
Now you've just impoverished someone, and you put them back, in a dating pool where they're hampered, and you put them back in a dating pool with a degree of frustration and hopelessness.
Yeah.
And now you might have made things more complicated than you need to. So I would like to see, as a society, a more thoughtful approach, and a more intentional approach to managing, domestic violence and really teaching folks, how to manage, how to have difficult conversations, teaching them, about, the consequence of behavioral health. We need to learn at a younger age.
Honestly, I think like that should be second, third grade,
Yeah.
Taught in elementary. And
taught,
all relationships, yes.
Taught and not punished. So for example,
right.
I remember in high school, when I was told, like if I'm minding my own business and somebody comes and sucker punches me in the back of the head, we both get suspended.
Yeah. It's like, I didn't do anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those kind of, trying to make it black and white, those kind of decisions, they undermine the credibility of people in authority to know how to rightly adjudicate these kind of situations.
Right.
So no wonder, when they keep seeing these ridiculous approaches of it at the school level, do they think, well, it's going to be just as ridiculous
as an adult
So
because there was no actual intervention or teaching that took place. I know for me, my kids' elementary school, like when there was a group of kids that instead of suspending them, they would have to go to like, they created like a therapy class for a group of boys and then a group of girls because they were seeing the same issues occur within the groups of them. Mm-hmm. So they intervened with, okay, we're going to have a group therapy. We're going to start learning. And these behavioral health skills or life skills are really what need to be taught so that the intervention is there.
Exactly.
And at a younger age, okay, let me not participate when I see that you're angry and egg this on. Let me, kind of walk away or learn some code words to have a proper conversation without it escalating. So those are really, really good keys that you shared.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to leave?
Just again, you will find yourself, I won't say that definitively. You will find yourself in a position where you have a difficult conversation. Ideally, you will have picked a partner, that you can have those kind of conversations where, you don't have to worry about escalation. If you don't have that partner, either figure out how to co-coach each other to become those kind of partners, or look for a way to, maybe create space. Now, all that assumes that you don't have entanglements like children and the like, because if you do, then you're on a learning course. Yeah. If you've got that kind of family already, then you two have to commit to learning how to have very, very tense, difficult conversations and be good at it. If for no other reason than just to model it for your own kids.
Yes, absolutely. Breaking that chain of behavioral.
Right.
Because that's where we learn it from. Yeah. So this was a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much.
You got it.
Around your people, like let's have real dialogue and conversation so that it doesn't have to end here, but we're going back and we're learning how to communicate and get in some classes. Nevada Partners is phenomenal with so many different life skill courses and classes that are free that you can utilize that are right here in your community. So take advantage of the resources that are available. And now is the time. I want to continue to honor those that by raising awareness and supporting those affected. If you found value in this episode, make sure that you share and stay connected. And thank you again for being a part of my community. And if you're in Las Vegas, come down on to Nevada Partners, to the Westside Incubator, and come have a real conversation in person. But until next week, I will see you all. Thank you again, Jon.
You got it.
I love you all. Have an amazing day.
All right.